Well, welcome to New Era, Dementia, and the Journey to Hope. My name is Ilana Gilg. I'm the program director here at the JCA, and it's so wonderful to see you all here tonight for this fantastic cutting edge and informative session. This program is generously co-sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association of Maine and is the result of many months of careful preparation. I'd like to extend my thanks to Tom Meuser, Drew Wyman, and Amy Angelo for your help in organizing this program. Thank you all so much. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to my colleague, Adam Segal, and CSCEP volunteer coordinator, Madeline Segal, for coming up with the idea for this panel and then working so tirelessly around the clock to make it happen.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to see everybody. This is great. We're excited about this turnout. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the JCA and Ilana and Adam and Madeline for helping us put this together. So thank you very much. So like Ilana said, I'm Drew Wyman, Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association Maine chapter. I'm really glad to be here and see everyone in person and appreciate you all joining us. I'm also appreciative of the efforts of all the panelists here today from the various organizations for sharing their time and expertise to support families navigating Alzheimer's and other dementia. The community partnerships we have here in Maine are essential to help families. So many organizations are doing excellent work, and we really thrive to be in coordination with one another. So like many of you, I have a personal connection to the fight against Alzheimer's, and I first learned about it back in 1980 when I was 10 years old. Following the death of my grandfather, my family learned that my grandmother was in the mid stages of the disease. As a couple, they'd been hiding it and compensating for her cognitive decline, but she was clearly unable to live on her own. So we brought her into my house and to care for her. And we did the best we could with what we had. We were not educated about Alzheimer's and considered it typical aging and typical memory loss. And my job as a kid, as a helper, was really just to keep her company, which kept her calm. And on occasion, I would do activities with her, like paint her fingernails. I learned how to give her a manicure. But thankfully, we have come a long way since then in our knowledge about dementia and how to best care for our loved ones. This is due, in no small part, to the work of the Alzheimer's Association. We're the leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. And we lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction, and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. So nationwide, there are 75 chapters, including our little chapter in Maine, which we serve the entire state with just 6 staff. How can we possibly do this? Well, thanks to our strong cadre of program volunteers, which Amy Angelo manages and oversees, we're able to offer right now around 36 support groups statewide, hundreds of public education and awareness programs, and several special events like this one tonight, thanks to the collaboration with our community partners. In addition, our advocacy volunteers affect systemic change at the federal and state levels, asking lawmakers to fund and prioritize the response to dementia. This is now's a good time to address a very common question, right? We get this all the time. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, dementia is really the umbrella term that describes the cognitive symptoms such as memory loss, thinking, issues with spatial relationships, language, problem solving, and other abilities that are severe enough to interfere with daily living. There are many types of dementia, but Alzheimer's is the most common, accounting for about 60 to 80% of all cases, and is defined by certain biomarkers like amyloid plaques, tau tangles, brain atrophy. And although our name is the Alzheimer's Association, I really want everyone to remember that we address all forms of dementia throughout our work. The second most common is vascular dementia, which occurs because of microscopic bleeding and blood vessel blockage in the brain. And it is possible to have more than one type of dementia, more than one cause, and that's referred to as mixed dementia. There are many conditions that can cause symptoms similar to dementia, including some that are reversible, and this is why talking to your doctor as soon as you notice any warning signs is so important. Despite the fact that we've made significant progress, the challenge before us is still great. Alzheimer's and other dementia remain a serious public health issue, and the prevalence and costs are substantial. Today, nearly 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. just under 30,000 in Maine, and that is projected to nearly double just in the next 25 years. And health and long-term care costs this year for people living with Alzheimer's will reach $360 billion. And in 2050, this is projected to reach nearly $1 trillion. So we know the impacts are serious. More than 95% of people living with dementia also have at least one other chronic condition. And the family caregivers bear a significant responsibility for their care, just like mine did in 1980. More than 11 million caregivers are providing over 18 billion hours of unpaid care valued at $364 billion. So I know there's no way you're going to remember any of those statistics, but there is we have one page on our website dedicated to that, alz.org/facts. And those are constantly updated. We release a report every March with all the current data. Another thing that the association does, we address the public health crisis by promoting brain health, providing education and support to the millions who face dementia every day, advancing critical research toward methods of treatment, prevention, and a cure. And collective progress has really led us to this point in time, this is why we are calling it the new era of hope. There are several reasons for us to feel hopeful. First, research funding is at an all-time high, allowing scientists to leave no stone left unturned, which was not always the case. Thanks to bipartisan advocacy efforts and congressional champions like Senator Collins here in Maine, current Alzheimer's research funding at the National Institutes of Health is now at $3.8 billion. That's a good number to remember, $3.8 billion a year. And just over a decade ago, NIH funding for Alzheimer's hovered right around 400 million. So that's a result of a lot of great advocacy work. We're also the largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's research globally, including we fund research right here in Maine. And we host an international conference. We connect the global scientific community to learn and collaborate and share information for maximum impact. We're also nimble enough, we're able to bridge gaps in research funding by enabling young researchers to continue their work until they are established enough to apply for federal funding, like an indie record label, right? So, and finally, we have 2 FDA-approved treatments that aim to slow the progression of Alzheimer's for those in the earliest stages. And although that's not a cure, the new treatments have given families some hope, and it's also encouraged earlier conversations with doctors regarding warning signs and early detection. And this is really just the beginning. And then third, new diagnostic tools such as the blood-based biomarker tests will improve access to early diagnosis, particularly in rural and underserved areas. Right now, we just have the PET scan and spinal tap. Finally, we're working to usher in a new era of better care. Last year, Medicare announced a nationwide pilot program called GUIDE to test a new methodology for dementia care management that the Alzheimer's Association has long advocated for, and we have 2 health systems in Maine participating. So we have more hope than we could only have dreamt about 40 years ago. With more knowledge, resources, and support, we can maintain a high quality of life after diagnosis and help individuals live their best life. We're eager to work on behalf of Mainers, and we continue to advocate for improving quality care and assuring a competent workforce. Thank you, GWEP and Dr. Wehry, who's here. And advancing risk reduction and promoting cognitive health like we're all doing right now today. Thank you, Tom Meuser, and thank you, JCA, and all of you who are participating. We want to increase early detection and ensure accurate diagnosis. Dr. Blake is here from Maine Health Geriatric Center, you heard from her. And enabling a coordinated state response to the growing Alzheimer's crisis with the AAA's Southern Maine Area Agency on Aging is here. I see somebody. And all who are involved in the Maine CDC's Healthy Brain Initiative work. Everyone has access to our 24/7 helpline, 800-272-3900, and we have our resources on the table back there. And our website, alz.org, is full of information, all at no cost. And we are just so happy to have so many great community partners. Maine is a small town. We couldn't do this without each other. And I really appreciate you all being here and taking information back to your own communities. And it is with my great honor and privilege to introduce a very dear friend, Ralph Carmona, Professor Ralph, who's an advocate. He's been to DC with us, and he's also just joined the National Alzheimer's Association Early Stage Advisory Group. Ralph, thank you all.
You're gonna have to lower this for little people here. Okay, now this is kind of like a homecoming for me. I see people here I hadn't seen for 9, 10 years. There's Judy Rosen over here at the mayor's office. I see Dina Weinstein. These are characters that kind of permeated the community. Sam Cohen over there, yes, operations, your operations guy. I'm thinking, whoa, this is something. So it's kind of exciting to be here because at least I'm reconnecting with people in this little village we have in Portland. Well, let me begin by telling you that to a large extent, I have a personal problem, and it is connected with a public issue that involves you people in this room. That's why you're here, right? It is a personal problem that was brought to my attention by my best friend and my wife, Vana Carmona. About 10 years ago, I had run for local public office in Portland, and I was thinking about writing a book, which I'm working on. There's as I mentioned, Sam, there's a real Jewish thread in it, but that's another conversation. And I began to teach at Southern Maine Community College. So suddenly, out of the blue, my wife comes to me and says that she thinks I have attention deficit disorder. She says, you're forgetting things. You're not remembering things. And that's a problem. Now, if you had that kind of exchange with your spouse, what would be the first reaction? Not good, right? Well, this was no exception. We had these horrific arguments, but then we agreed that, okay, let's go see a neuropsychologist rather, and find out what the problem is. So he did his testing that kind of got me confused. But he said, no, Ralph, you don't have ADD, but I think you might have MCI, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. So then we went to go see a neurologist, and the neurologist gave us this test, and he confirmed that I have MCI. Suddenly, the lights really went on, and I thought, well, what's next? Well, you need a brain scan to really see what's on your brain, whether there's this amyloid protein on your brain that spreads and becomes dementia. What's the insurance cost? Will insurance cover it? No, thousands of dollars for a spinal tap or a PET scan. Then I really began to get fearful. I said, gosh, I have this memory loss my wife has discerned. What happens when this evolves into this dementia where there's a disconnect between the brain and the body? Like what happened to my mother, who had 15 years of dementia until she passed away at 97. This was really a situation of dark and dread for us. What were we going to do? But then there was light in this tunnel of doom and gloom. The neurologist turned to us and said, you know, he goes, science is beginning to engage in this process and seek answers to this problem. Really? He said, there's clinical trials that are out there to look at drugs that might diminish this stuff on your brain. So we got together with him and we started looking for a place where there was a clinical study, and Boston University was providing it. My wife jumped on this, got me into this clinical study. At least we'd get a brain scan. They confirmed I had this protein on my brain. And from there, what happened was for the next 9 years, I found myself driving to Boston University, taking these infusions with potential side effects, the worst being the bleeding of your brain. In doing this whole process, I wondered, well, there's a testing There's a scans, the scanning to check, make sure nothing's wrong with you after a certain period of time. My wife and I signed a consent form, not knowing if we were taking the drug or some harmless placebo. But then something interesting happened. 6 months into the infusion, my wife went to the researchers and said, my husband's taking this drug and it's working because I don't have any problems with him anymore. and they said, that's great, but unless the FDA approves this drug, you will never know whether he's taking the drug or not. So this was 6 years. We're 6 years into it. We continued this. And then suddenly, 9 years later, the FDA, last July 2023, approved this drug, which is today called Leqembi. And my wife was right. I had been taking this drug since day one. Isn't that interesting? The personal, again, personal trouble, the personal became public. We were viewed as heroes because we engaged in this clinical process that basically is going to help millions of people in this country and around the world. My personal problem became a public interest when we demonstrated that science can help society in terms of dealing with diseases like this. So, C. Wright Mills is right. None of us is alone. We are all connected in this public square of society. And when I see people like you in this room and conversations I've had, you have a concern. And that gives me hope that the work's going to go on, the cause is going to endure, and the dream of seeking solutions to this problem, like the drug I'm taking, but real solutions. I like to take a pill instead of infusions, for instance, And I'd like to see have a drug come up, which is an experiment that wipes it out completely, thing on your brain, The dream will never die, okay? Thank you.
I'm Tom Meuser. I am a clinical psychologist and specialist in aging. I've lived in Maine 6 years. I moved here 6 years ago because I'm a primary caregiver for my dad, who has now moderate to severe dementia. My first memory of dementia was my great-grandmother, who I saw when I was a teenager and in a very sad state in a nursing home. And I know at that time, quality of life for persons with advanced dementia, well, it wasn't very good. What gives me hope, in addition to everything that both Drew and Ralph have shared, is that there is a true understanding and acceptance of persons with dementia and their families that did not exist 30, 40 years ago. The personhood, the lived experience, the wisdom of persons with dementia matters. And I think that part gives me hope. In the case of my own father, he lives in the present. He still has flashes of memory from his past, and I relish those moments. I've become the keeper of his memories. Fortunately, my memory is still good, knock on wood. And so now when I reminisce with my dad, I remind him of his life story. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Something else I did with him, much of my career was in academia. I recently retired from the University of New England, where I ran the Aging Center. Some of you I know from that period. Throughout my career in teaching, I've taught students how to interview older adults about their life stories and life wisdom. And I thought, I better practice what I preach. So I sat with my dad in a video camera many years ago, and we recorded 5 hours of his life story. It was really interesting. One of the memories that stands out from the first time we sat down is he said, I had a very traumatic childhood. I'm not talking about it. I said, fine, you only talk about what you want to, Dad. Guess what we talked about for 3 straight hours? Traumatic childhood. We recently sat down and rewatched those videos together in his moderate to severe demented state, and he sat there smiling and nodding. For him, it was a way to reach back in time and touch himself when he was still himself. But you know, that also gave me hope, because that man I've always known and loved is still there. And I was talking to one of you earlier, gentleman here in the front, about that paradoxical nature of this disease, that there are those flashes, those moments when we can celebrate even with the person with dementia. So there's a lot to be hopeful about. I am the moderator for this, I know is going to be a tremendous panel, and I don't like standing behind the panelists, so I'm going to ask Drew to put the bios up for me with the slide clicker. So our panel tonight is intended to raise awareness about what is Alzheimer's, some of the issues regarding diagnosis, but some of the larger quality of life contextual issues as well. And we want to make it as personal as we can. So while the panelists are speaking, hold your questions, but please know when we're done, we're going to open the floor and pass the mic, and feel free to ask as many questions as our time will allow. When we do get to that point, please introduce yourself and what you do, because there are a number of professionals in this room I know who could be probably sitting up here. So I'm very pleased to welcome our 4 panelists today. You can read their bios on screen. Dr. Rachel Blake is a geriatrician with Maine Med, and she's waving at you. I got to work with Dr. Blake around some research, and I just got to really appreciate Dr. Blake's perspective and her energy and her drive, and I'm very pleased to have her today here. Dr. Susan Wehry, the amazing Dr. Susan Wehry. Any of you who know Susan knows that she is a force, and I mean that in a positive way. Susan is a geriatric psychiatrist who has both worked clinically, but she's done a lot of policy and advocacy work in her time. And you're going to learn about what she does, alluded to by Drew, to educate health professionals here in Maine about how to work with persons with dementia. We go with the next slide, please. And Rubin, who's raising his hand, Rubin Segal, as you can read from his bio, is a retired attorney who has also a very rich and varied life experience. And I got to know Rubin through Madeline Segal here through the JCA, and Madeline's raising her hand in the back. They have some connection, I think. Rubin is here because he, like Ralph, has found a path to live and, I would say, thrive, despite struggling with a disease that has, implications for quality of life. And he's going to share some of his thoughts about that as we go forward. And last but not least, Amy Angelo. Amy is a good personal friend of mine. She is a dynamite program manager for the Alzheimer's Association. I encourage you to talk to her afterwards, share ideas about programs that you want at your organization or community, and she'll find a way. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our panel discussion, and I'm going to probably move up here and sit here. I'm also a videographer by hobby, so I might play with my video camera while people talk. But Dr. Blake, we're going to address the first question to you, and your microphone is ready and on? It is.
I think it's working. Is that okay?
You hear it? Okay. So what are the benefits of early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and what makes this possible today?
Well, first, I will say it's a very exciting time. So I've been doing this job. I work with Maine Health, and I'm at the memory clinic affiliated with the hospital. I've been doing this job about 12 years, and I would say the last 1.5 to 2 years has been the most exciting time to be in this field. There are so many moving parts. So yeah, in terms of the benefits of early diagnosis, I think there are many. Scientifically speaking, we're looking at the possibility of several new treatments rolling out. We've already got 2 FDA-approved treatments in the last year and a half, but we're also looking at a plethora of other options coming forward. And so earlier diagnosis means earlier access to those treatments, also the option of participating in clinical trials. I think from a social standpoint, the earlier the better in terms of talking with patients and families about this diagnosis and what to expect, but also providing support and getting them connected with the right resources. So from a planning perspective, I think it can really be a benefit. And, you know, I think a lot of the fear comes from the unknown. And so giving people an understanding of what's going on, I think can often be a relief. So in terms of what makes it possible, that's the really exciting part. There have been a lot of great strides with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we have a lot more diagnostic tools than we had even 6 months ago.
So we heard from Ralph about his wife's observations of early symptoms. But as you work with families around what they notice and sort of those progression, what are the things that people should be thinking about looking for?
Well, I think, you know, as you saw earlier in Drew's presentation, there are different things that can affect the brain, different cognitive changes that can happen. Alzheimer's disease is typically characterized by a pretty prominent short-term memory impairment being kind of one of the first things that tends to emerge. We also see difficulty with what we call executive function, which I often tell people is sort of like the front office of the brain. So organizational skills, attention and concentration, sequencing, things like having trouble with a recipe or more complicated tasks that didn't used to be challenging. Those are things we pay attention to as well. But really the short-term memory aspect is one of the larger things we're looking at.
Right, thank you. Next question for Dr. Wehry. You know, changes in memory and thinking are common in aging. How can we better educate and empower families to acknowledge and address this in a way that works?
Yeah, you know, I think that there are a lot of ways, and tonight is one of them. I mean, I have to say, like Dr. Blake, I've been at this a long time. 40 years, in fact, I've been a physician. And in the early part of my career, not only did we not talk about it, when I would raise questions about older adult mental health, I was told as a young physician, don't waste your time. Well, I have been interested in older adult health long before I became one, and you can bet that I'm even more invested now. So I really think, Tom, that one of the ways that we help families and ourselves is by having the conversation over and over, holding events like this, and really speaking kind of candidly about what is and what isn't dementia, what is and isn't normal changes associated with aging, because dementia is not a normal part of it, right? So there are cognitive changes that occur as we age. Our memories aren't as good. You know when that change is measurable? Around age 30. Okay? So I get it. Things change. We are not as fast. Our processing speed is not as fast. But not all cognitive change with aging is MCI or mild cognitive impairment, but some of it is. All mild cognitive impairment is not early dementia, though some of it is. And I was so happy to hear Drew, and I want to underscore it, point to the fact that even that mild cognitive impairment that is early dementia, some of it is reversible. And some of it that is not reversible, we have new ways of approaching. So these are the reasons that I'm hopeful, but frankly, because of my experience, I'm just so glad that we're talking about it. And we're talking about it in a way that is straight talk, not false hope, not sugarcoating. Some of us are going to get dementia. Some of us are going to get heart disease. Some of us are going to get cancer. I get it, no matter how healthy we are. I mean, how good our lifestyle. So we want to prevent what we can and promote good health in what we can't. And so I think the way families deal with this is by talking about it.
Mhm. Yeah, it can be a life-changing diagnosis. And yet, in my own experience, some elements of normal life continue and even can be enhanced. It takes, though, a willingness to step forward and acknowledge that the change is happening. How do you support individuals and families to go in and see someone like Dr. Blake?
I think a couple of ways. One of the things that I've become increasingly fond of, and I was so glad to meet Rubin before the event started and to hear from Ralph, I think we underutilize people living with dementia as peer supporters. We have a lot to learn from the disability community, who have been promoting the nothing about us without us for a very long time. So I think the one way you help families is to make sure that anybody with cognitive change or with MCI or early stage dementia is connected to what is a wonderful national support network of peer support. So people with dementia are not alone. Care partners are not alone. There is the same kind of national support for that. I think it is important that we look to lived experience, as we're about to again, for hearing real ways that people can thrive with dementia. So I think that what families need to hear and what people living with dementia need to know is that life doesn't end, and it is important to find the ways to accommodate the brain changes to still be able to contribute. So I've become kind of a proponent of the dementia as disease and dementia as a disability. Because when we think about disability, we think about accommodation, we think about integration, and I think that's another paradigm shift, along with the others that Drew mentioned, that's going to take us another leap forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, please clap whenever you want to, particularly when you hear gems like that. So I'm going to take it back to Dr. Blake. So, it used to be said that you didn't know if a person had Alzheimer's until an autopsy happened after death. The playing field is very different today. We have new ways of testing memory. We have new ways of recognizing symptoms. We have study of biomarkers has been mentioned. Even a blood test seems to be emerging. So how does that context both influence your work as a geriatrician, and what does it mean for families who are, venturing into this space, this new playing field?
Well, I think overall it's been a very positive change. The advent of biomarker testing has really shifted a lot of things. I do think, in our clinic, the first thing we do is take a thorough history. And I still think that's the most important part. Talking with both those who are affected and their families, understanding their experiences and what changes have occurred, and really looking at the big picture as much as we possibly can. One of the things I'm always looking for are things that are reversible, right? Making sure that we're not missing something simple like a thyroid disorder or a mood disorder or something else that is readily treatable. And then, if it is looking like something that is looking more like Alzheimer's disease, starting to think about what the options are for clarifying that diagnosis and moving forward in terms of planning. And so up until just a month ago, really, clinically, we were working with, the biomarker testing that was available is very expensive and harder to access. So fancy PET scans, an amyloid PET scan, or a lumbar puncture, which is really nobody's idea of a fun time. Just within the last month, we've seen the blood tests come onto the market and be clinically available. So I am now utilizing that selectively. And I think that's going to be another major shift. I think the task at hand now is determining when to use that and how to be careful about it. I think it's not something that should be done in isolation without a conversation. But it's a really exciting tool to help clarify diagnosis, particularly in people who have very early symptoms and we may not have other ways of really solidifying that to allow them to move forward with the next steps in treatment. So this is a really exciting time for that.
So what I hear in this is that the sort of the bedrock of dementia work is still that traditional doctor-patient relationship, the interview, knowing the history, and I imagine involving family and knowing the history is a really important piece of this as well. How do you support families when you suspect the diagnosis is happening? How do you kind of prepare people for that news?
Well, I think, nothing is perfect, but we do our best. Actually, one of our social workers is in our audience today, Kathy Klein, who's an active member here on the board, I think. So we have an interdisciplinary team at our clinic, occupational therapist, a social worker, and myself. And so we spend a lot of time talking separately with, in the initial evaluation, talking separately with both the patient and their family or caregiver. And then, when we meet to discuss a diagnosis, we set aside time for looking at advanced care planning, local resources, and getting people set up with appropriate support groups and counseling as necessary. So I try to do my best to explain why I'm coming to the conclusions that I'm coming to and answer questions as best I can. There are a lot of unknowns still in this field, but we try to make ourselves available for that as much as we can. And I think the social work support is really one of the most important things. And I'm not just saying that because Kathy is sitting over there, but I really think that's one of the major benefits of our clinic.
Well, in working with older adults in general, but I think around dementia, interprofessional exchange and teamwork is critical. And yeah, I appreciate that part of your approach very much. So I'm going to come back to Dr. Wehry for the next question. Simply growing older might put a person at risk for Alzheimer's. Aging is one of the risk factors. Having a family member may increase one's risk. That's true in my case. But despite this, many persons live long lives, maintain good cognitive health well into their 80s and 90s. How might lifestyle and maybe the way people choose to live their lives help either prevent or enhance quality of life, even if dementia is there?
Yeah, and I hope some of you are going to know the answer to this question and can give it to me at the end. And the question is this: how do you motivate people to make those healthy lifestyle choices? I bet there isn't a person in this room who doesn't know that physical exercise is good for you. Okay, so I'm going to sit here and say, well, physical exercise is important, and you're going to go, duh. Okay, but the question really is not what lifestyle choices, but how do we create conditions in which people can embrace lifestyle choices? So here's the science of it. Physical exercise is the #1 best thing you can do for your brain, full stop. It also, as it turns out, is good for your heart, it's good for your lungs, it's good for your bones. So exercise, I don't know any other way to say it. I've been saying it for 40 years, but what we know now is this. How much do you need? What's the dose of exercise? It looks like it's 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, or 150 minutes a week. Split it up however you want, and that needs to be aerobic. And here's the reason. We heard from Drew about the different kinds of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, mixed, and so forth. We can control for some of the risk from other forms of dementia as well as Alzheimer's. So another is have your annual wellness visit, have an annual checkup, make sure that your hypertension is under control, and you may be able to modify your blood pressure with exercise, diet, weight loss, and medication, right? So what I say to people is, look, I don't care if you're 30 or 40 or 50, 70, 80, or 90. When you address your brain health in a focused way, I guarantee you can get a better quality of life. We know, for example, that things like stress causes a huge outpour of cortisol, We know that's toxic to the brain. So meditate, mindfulness practice, get outside when we finish, and be in nature. Nature is one of the most potent stress reducers we have. So I think, Tom, the simple answer is people need to look at what we know about what works. Don't do all of them. Don't say, I'm going to eat blueberries. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do this. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do that. Find the one that you like. Get a habit, practice it, but know the facts about like what's going to be the most worthwhile thing you can do for your brain. And the final thing I want to say about that is social connection, which others have mentioned as well. We know that living in isolation is difficult. We know we live in a village. We know it takes a village. Lots of discussion about that. But when you are living with any chronic illness, it's good for you to be in connection with others. It's good for you to look for ways to give back as well as to receive. And it's just good for your brain. And so it's good for your health as well. Tom knows I could keep going, but I just got the nod. And, and we have a lot of other people to hear from. So I do want to stop, but it is.
But I think Rachel wants to do a follow-up.
Well, I was just going to say, I think if you go for a walk with some friends in the woods, you've covered a lot of territory. Bravo.
Well, and I think, Susan, your remarks there set up what I was going to ask Rubin. So I'm going to have you pass the mic and we'll come back.
I think he's.
Oh, we've got another mic right down there. All right. So, so Rubin, Hillary Clinton has a phrase. She actually repeated it during the Democratic National Convention. Some of you might have heard it. It takes a village. And as somebody who has Alzheimer's disease, I imagine you've experienced the benefits of having a village. And I'm curious if you can talk about what it takes to kind of accept help from others and how that help can make a difference for you.
That's beautifully asked. Thank you. I think that'll be helpful. It does take a village. First of all, I want to thank everybody that's here, whether I know you or not, and my family who are here, whether just for me or for others. It's a pleasure. And last but not least, my grandson who is here, and I hope he will enjoy what I have to say as well. He's, how old is he? 2.5. But he's always got good things to say. What have I got to say? Well, I was thinking about some of the stuff. You know, it's really weird. I'm now 76 years old. Don't tell anybody, but who are here, whether just for me or for others. It's a pleasure. And last but not least, my grandson who is here, and I hope he will enjoy what I have to say as well. He's, how old is he? 2.5. But he's always got good things to say. What have I got to say? Well, I was thinking about some of the stuff. You know, it's really weird. I'm now 76 years old. Don't tell anybody, but that's amazing to me. And I have family who originally came during the war or right after the war, the war being the invasions of the Nazis and that kind of stuff. And I remember, I don't know why actually, but when I was a young boy, I had this interest in this crazy brain idea about, you know, what is that all about? Why was I interested then? I don't know. I couldn't understand worth a dime what I was trying to get at, but that started me off in general. And then as I got a little older, I found that my mother, who I didn't appreciate it. I mean, how many people are going to say that? But I really didn't appreciate how amazing a woman she was. She came here from Poland. She said it was at a time when it was hard to get through, but she had no reason not to expect her to go through it, which she did with her little brother, younger brother, I should say. She was always there next to my dad. She always told me that, Dad was the head of the family, so sometimes she didn't tell him where he was going wrong. But I understood that what was happening. Anyway, I'm just giving you a background where I came from. So naturally, I was a rebel. I was getting towards the end of my college days and so on, and I told my mom, listen, I want to let you know that I'm going to go to school to be a lawyer. And her response was great, I thought. And, take it as it is. She said to me, no, Rubin, you can't be a lawyer. I said, what do you mean I can't be a lawyer? Why not? And in her best way of saying things, she said, because you can't do the things that lawyers have to do. You can't act that way. I said, well, that's where I'm going, okay. What's the point of all this anyway? I don't know. But I just wanted you to be aware of the kind of stuff that I still remember as important.
Yeah. Well, and that connection to
Yes.
your story, I think, is a critical part of who you are and who you continue to be at this stage of your life. So I appreciate knowing that story. As you think about your village today, the people you lean on for some support, and you still live in your own home in the community.
Absolutely.
And you're adept at taking the bus, I know.
I think there would be some argument about that. I will take the position that you are correct.
So how do you maintain your quality of life, Rubin?
I mean, that's such a great question. I appreciate it. And I got to tell you that somehow or other, I am doing that, although some of the family may not think that's accurate. I became aware that I was forgetting stuff. I'm going to put it that way. And actually, I was forgetting a lot. And I was finding it difficult to tell other people, what was happening to me. It started off with the idea that people I knew forever, I couldn't remember their names. And when that started out, I sort of tried to keep it to myself so that nobody would know that this guy who was fairly smart when he was growing up can't even friggin' remember somebody's name that they've known for a long time. So then I was thinking about this other thing. I started, sorry, one more thing. I consider myself a religious Jew. And I go to services at least a couple times a week at the Chabad house in Portland. I don't see anybody from Chabad, but that's okay. And the rabbi there helps me and the guys there help me. Some of the guys are doctors. They have their own visions of what I need to do. And so that also brings a certain amount of I don't know what the next word is. See, that's yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. When I forget the correct word, I just put it on the Alzheimer's idea.
Okay.
I can't remember the word. I got Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. I don't really say it like that, but that's the way I try to put it. In any event, I talk with other doctors who also happen to go to the religious services and who have a brain in their head. And they talk about things that you can do, I guess you might say. And the first thing that came up to my mind was about remembering persons' names. How can we do that? Is there anything that we can do to remember people's names? Well, I found out everybody I talked to, which wasn't a huge group, but everyone I talked to had the same system to remember names. And it went like this. First of all, and I may be totally mistaken about the brain part of this, and please call me out on it. I will not be embarrassed. Well, maybe a little embarrassed. Anyway, I met a lot of people who, for some reason, had problems remembering names. So I said, what do you do? How do you remember names? And they all had the same system. That system is as follows. Suppose the guy's name is, let's see. Now I got to think of a name. Okay, give me a name.
Let's do John. How's John?
John, all right. Let's do John, but I can't remember the name. Okay, figure that out. And so I'm meeting somebody else and I say, what's your name? And they give me a name and I said, gee, I can never remember your name either. How do you figure it out? And he said, well, let me see how I said it. It was his wife. No, it couldn't have been his wife. It must have been like his wife's. It was a family member that he should know the name of. And in any event, okay, we'll do it like this. He says, my name is Michael. And my wife's name is, I can't remember her name again. It begins with an M also. Any assistance anywhere for the wife of somebody whose name begins with M, like Masha? Oh, let's call it Masha. And his wife's name is Masha. I said, oh, Masha, yeah, and I don't, but yeah, I know a lot of girls whose name is Masha. Okay, so that's going to make me able to recognize your wife's name, and also somehow that's going to come back to your name, which is Michael. So that's what we figured out. With regards to the guy that was a friend whose name was Michael, and I kept forgetting, I start with the idea that it's related to his wife, who's Marcia, and we go from there. What?
So
Thinking that it might be like association.
It's association.
mhm.
And okay, that's great for this one person, one family. I've got this idea. Okay, good. But I was finding that almost everybody I talked to was using the same system. Now that sounds crazy. I'm not lying, I promise.
Mhm. You don't necessarily have to have dementia to use that system. I think I do too. And what I find is interesting in what you're sharing, Rubin, is an idea that Dr. Wehry brought up before, and that's a disability frame to understand Alzheimer's.
Hey, what?
Because
Tell me again.
a disability framework to understand Alzheimer's, because you are addressing areas of deficit with humor. We know that you're very good there, but you're also using memory tricks. You are seeking ways to reconnect so that you can maintain your quality of life. And I think that's the recipe, and an important recipe that Rubin shares. I'm going to turn the question back actually to Dr. Wehry. And Dr. Wehry, working with persons with dementia, I think, takes a certain humility, but also a certain skill set. And I know one of the aspects of your work is helping to educate professionals about not just recognizing the symptoms, but really how to work with people. Could you talk about the AgingME program?
I'd love to. Thanks, Tom. So we were awarded at the University of New England a 5-year HRSA grant, which started on July 1st, which has as its goal, as Tom said, really training and educating the next generation of healthcare professionals so that they will be age-friendly, dementia-friendly, and help us begin to move towards a dementia-inclusive society. In addition to that, we're working through that program at the local level with our area agencies on aging, with the AARP lifelong learning communities, with many of the long-term service and supports, with Maine Health, with Northern Light. In other words, we're reaching out across the whole state to develop trainings for health professionals and to educate the community. So we have a whole series on the aging brain, working with Drew and working with folks at BOLD at the Maine CDC to, again, connect people with the idea that there are things that you can do to live with a chronic disease like Alzheimer's disease. We don't have to be as afraid to go and find out what those cognitive changes are about. And so our grant works with academia, works with health systems, works in the community, trying to just get the word out. And I brought some of our information. We're at the back table there, and I'll hang around and eat some more pizza at the end. And if you want to come and look at some of our materials. But we're really taking an approach which says, we all need to know new ways of thinking about living with a chronic illness. That's people with it, people without it, their family, their friends, the health professionals, the social service professionals, and to find out what contributions we can make. Tom, you were so good to underscore your technique around memory. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet that I'm personally very excited about is cognitive stimulation therapy. It is one of the non-pharmacologic interventions that's actually working. And there are very specific strategies, very specific techniques for workarounds. When a part of your brain doesn't work, it's really, frankly, kind of like a part of your body that doesn't work. You work around it and you find some other part of your brain that's working, part of your body. And I'll tell you who's really good at this are occupational therapists in particular. I was so glad that there's one on your team because it's the way they think. And so it takes a lot of different disciplines, but that's what we're doing. We're working with all disciplines, all systems across the state. And we also, in this new grant, have a very special focus on working with people in the long-term care community, specifically nursing homes, to really try to build up our direct care workforce. CNAs, people are doing the hands-on frontline service, and I'm particularly excited about that they too are getting the attention that they deserve to be better able to serve. So those are the highlights. We also, in case you don't make it back to my table, do want to leave you with 2 names, and that's the Dementia Action Alliance, DAA Now, .org, I think is their website, and the other is the National Council of Dementia Minds. If there are other professionals, lawyers, physicians in the audience or that you know who do have early to mid-stage dementia, there's a great group of docs with dementia who are part of the National Council of Dementia Minds that have a virtual support group specifically for professionals. And they are an awesome group. So I just want to make sure you hear about that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Dementia Action Alliance is one, And theirs is easier to remember. It's D as in dog, AA, DAA now, the word now, .org. The other one is National Council of Dementia Minds. I don't know their web address. But I do have some information back there. There's also a lot of information available that we're also getting out through our grant on technology tips. We have a big colloquium coming up in the fall on how to use technology as another tool around memory and so on. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you. I'm learning stuff here as well. This is exciting. And I think this is another indicator of hope, just the plethora of services and options that you have today that my great-grandmother had no option to take advantage of. So we're going to shift over to Amy, and I'm going to go off script here for a moment, Amy, because I think it's common in thinking about dementia. We talk about symptoms and diagnosis. I think what I appreciated so much from both Ralph and Rubin is the personal side, that these are persons living their lives. They have strengths, they have interests, they have contributions to make. And so often that personhood can get lost in the diagnosis treatment game. And to me, at least my experience with the Alzheimer's Association, supporting personhood is at the core. And I'd appreciate if you would comment on that.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. It's a new buzzword or words in the last several years, person-centered dementia care. But it is real. And the Alzheimer's Association has a training that we've been doing for a number of years in settings, in care settings. And it's a train the trainer model. It's for assisted livings, for memory care facilities, for nursing homes. And it is teaching providers how to deliver more person-centered dementia care. That's just one piece of how we address that. We also have an 800 helpline number, 800-272-3900. And that number is available 24/7. And so if anyone finds themselves in a difficult moment of caregiving, of just, of overwhelm, of whatever you might be experiencing, you could call that number, and the other person answering that line is a master's level clinician who is going to address your very personal situation, the specific situation that you're dealing with the person with dementia or Alzheimer's. So they could also help you to care plan for that, for your loved one, and they could do care consultations with you, with your family members, and determine, who's involved, what's most important for you in this caregiving journey, what's most important for the person with the dementia, and help you build out a care plan on how you're going to address that situation moving forward. Yeah, I don't know. We also, do you want me to go on or?
Yeah,
no,
well, so let's say I've just brought my parent in and had my parent diagnosed by Dr. Blake with early Alzheimer's disease, and I'm coming to the chapter for the first time. What can I expect?
If someone calls our office in Maine, so if you call the 800 line, that is not through the Maine chapter, but it is nearby and connected with us. But if somebody calls directly to the Maine chapter, they will get one of our 6 employees there to speak with. Usually it is either myself or our office manager. And we're going to help you understand what the resources are. what the Alzheimer's Association has to offer, and also get you connected with community organizations, area agency on agings, what respite care programs are available to you, what, is home care an option? Are you looking at placement? Like there's so much involved in care planning. So we want to get to know you. We want to understand your situation and get you connected to the most appropriate resources. We have, as Drew mentioned earlier, we have many support groups, caregiver support groups. We have an in-person group for people who have been recently diagnosed. It's called Living Well After Diagnosis. That is at our office in Scarborough. So we have many, gosh, how many? 34 support groups. I have the numbers. 13 are virtual and 21 are in person. 4 of them are hybrid. So I do have a list of our support groups on our table back there. And they're just our support groups for York and Cumberland County. We have several more listed on our website for Northern Maine and different parts of Maine. So yeah, we have the support groups, and we also have free education programs that we offer for the public. So you can find all that information on our website. You could call the office and we'll be happy to help you. And not to mention
over there.
and we do have many brochures on different topics on our table. And we also, like I was going to say, is the website, which is so abundant in information. So please, if you haven't been to our website, it's alz.org. And you could just look through all the different resources. There are categories around caregiving, around planning, around how to talk to your doctor, how to talk to your family about dementia, safety, all different topics. So I would say that's a good place to start, or calling our office.
Okay. Well, we're running a little ahead of time, but I feel like we're at a good spot to maybe shift and engage our audience, members who have questions and comments. So we're going to go ahead and do that.
So my question is that when people get older, not that I would be one of them, but when you're older, how do you know the difference? My memory is going a little bit. Is it age, or am I going to make an appointment with you tomorrow? I mean, when are you really going to say to yourself, maybe this isn't normal, in whatever that aging process is?
That's an excellent question, and I get that a lot. I think, when we're thinking about changes in cognition, one of the big things we do when we're asking questions is we ask about function on a day-to-day basis. So, there's a difference between walking to the room and not remembering what you were there for, or, forgetting to take your medications for 3 days, right? So when memory loss and memory change sort of rises to the level of affecting day-to-day function, that is certainly a reason to look into that. I think very early on in the process, some of those differences can be very subtle. And so I think that's where having a conversation with your primary care physician first about what you're experiencing is always a good place to start. And, sometimes when we're evaluating folks, it is for that very question. And that's where the cognitive testing and the history and for us come in. But a lot of it has to do with how it's affecting your day-to-day life. Yeah. We can make room for you. Yeah.
And Dr. Wehry, would you do a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. One of the reasons that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, have been so promoting the annual wellness visit is so that when people go, it's just like when you're a kid, right? You go in when you're well, not when you're sick, just to see how you're doing relative to your peers. Now, frankly, I don't think the annual wellness visit has lived up to its goals. And that is putting it so diplomatically. But it is at least an opportunity to go in and say, I want a cognitive screen. I want my blood pressure checked. I want a cognitive screen, and I want a screening for depression. Okay? Because that's another way to, I think, begin to get some measure of what's happening so that you don't have to worry constantly, is this serious enough? Go before it's serious. So I like the idea of seeing a primary care practitioner asking for a cognitive screen as another way of doing it. And then honestly, there are a lot of tools. I think the Alzheimer's Association has one. We don't have a specific tool, but we work together. And it's like the 10 warning signs. What's normal, what's not. And if you have more in the what's not column, see your doctor. You know, I guess that's the way I think about it.
I want to respond to with Judy's question. Judy, to a large extent, a lot of this has to do with the relationship you have with your loved ones. They are the people closest to knowing who you are, and when that memory slips, if they love you, they're going to raise that kind of question. The difficulty is that oftentimes people do not want to respond to acknowledging they have a problem. I have people who are good neighbors. We love them dearly, and we kept thinking something's going on there. And one day, I just had cataract surgery. It was fantastic, by the way. And so one day I called her and I said, she wanted to know how it went. I said, it went great. How's your husband? I'll say, Joe's doing. She goes, Joe? I said, yeah, Joe. How's he responding? She goes, did he take cataract surgery? Yeah, you guys talked to me about it. And I'm thinking, holy moly, they don't have a clue. And about 10 years before, they had made a decision to slow down. And that's contrary to the lifestyle kinds of discussions or comments that were made earlier.
Okay, so we've got a couple of hands I've seen. I'm going to try to make the room, but this hand was up early and it deserves the mic.
What I'm interested in is what's the relationship and is work being done with those who have COPD, AFib, and thyroid? So my question is, what kind of cross-cultural mixing are you doing with other disciplines that may be supporting your own work?
That's a great question. So first of all, I'll say my initial training was in family medicine. So I've delivered some babies and treated a lot of heart disease and stroke. So I think the common thread in many of the things that you mentioned actually is vascular disease and disease, using that word again, but vascular memory change is a real event and often occurs simultaneously with other types of memory changes. And so in something like atrial fibrillation, that can definitely be a factor. And one of my jobs in the initial evaluation, and one of the reasons we spend so much time with people, is to take a thorough look at their medical history in addition to the cognitive concerns. We look at medication lists very closely, and we look at past medical history and current medical issues. So I think there's a lot of talking between us and other specialists when people do have other conditions. One of the things I'm interested in right now is sleep apnea and its connection to cognition. So I think that's a great point, that there are a lot of medical conditions that can affect the way that our brain works for us. And that's one of the reasons to speak up when you're noticing changes, because some of these things are very treatable. And one of the reasons we check a thyroid hormone in almost everybody we see is because that is a treatable cause of cognitive change. And so there are some simple things that we'll always check on. But I think a lot of medical conditions can influence the brain. And so it's really important to have a whole picture.
What I would add to Dr. Blake's answer is that there is a lot of work being done in non-Western, non-traditional medicine, which I think you're also asking about, but I'm not familiar with any work specifically in among acupuncturists. I don't know a lot about that literature. I will tell you that for the last 2 years, I've been working with a co-investigator at the Cedars on looking for optimal engagement of people living with dementia in non-pharmacologic approaches. So we've been looking at the international literature, we've been looking at a lot of other approaches, non-Western. I'm also, although I'm an MD, I'm at an osteopathic medical school who really have as a philosophy helping people find the health or find the sort of health within, if you will, and appeal to the body's natural desire to be different and better. But we also don't have anything in OMM. We don't have anything in nutrition that specifically addresses some of your concerns, but it's an area of investigation. It's not my area of expertise, though some of the more creative ways that people are addressing cognition specifically, I'm more familiar with. And Amy?
So Drew actually just got back from the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Philadelphia. And it was a gathering of 14,000 people from around the whole world presenting their research. So if you're interested in maybe what that research is that's being done, who's being funded, you could look at the website. It's alz.org/research. You might find some more information there. Yeah.
Okay, I have a microphone. You've been spending a lot of time talking about early diagnosis and things that come along at the beginning of the disease. I am a caregiver person who is dealing with somebody who is not at the early stages of the disease. And he has a mixed dementia that's got all kinds of, I've heard Lewy body, I've heard Alzheimer's, I've heard Parkinsonian, I've heard all of these different he had strokes. So I don't really care what kind of dementia it is, to be quite frank. What I am trying to figure out is how do I navigate the health system? Because we have a neurologist, we have a neuropsychologist, we have supposedly a geriatrician, we have pneumonia, we have all kinds of different things going on, and I'm not finding anybody who can help me navigate all of these different types of issues that come up when somebody has dementia. And, there's a lot of dismissing things like, well, he's having swallowing problems because, that happens. And it's like, I need to deal with these things and I need to find people who are clinical, who can help me make intelligent decisions. So what I'm asking the panel is, who do you even go to and how do you navigate this as a caregiver who just wants to make sure that their father is getting the appropriate level of care?
Actually, Amy, I was pointing to you so that you would answer it. There actually has been, and the reason I wanted Amy to answer, a new program in Maine that was started about 3 years ago, seems like right around COVID times, either right before or after, called the Dementia Care Navigator Program. And we were a pilot site in partnership with Alzheimer's and partnership with Massachusetts. Okay, they were the ones studying it. Tom or somebody mentioned the new guide model, which is supposed to do exactly what you're asking for. And so let me say a couple of things. We are very aware that we are not doing as good a job as we could, well, frankly, at any stage. And for a while now, there's been an emphasis on early stage because of the enthusiasm around new treatments. Historically, we were sort of focused on the very late stage in nursing homes. And the middle to late stage, I think we're just catching up to. So I don't know what healthcare system you are part of, but it would be very reasonable to ask, have you implemented any part of GUIDE yet? Because both Maine Health and Northern Light are in the GUIDE model. And so that's a place to start. Is the Dementia Care Navigator program still going on?
We also have a dementia care coordination service that we work with the Massachusetts, New Hampshire chapter through, and we're really taking a public health approach with that. So that pilot program that Dr. Wehry was just referring to was adopted by Andwell Health and Maine Health, and it's just in the very beginning stages. But we should follow up after.
You are at the stage of the most difficult situation as a caregiver. You really are. I can see it on your face. My wife's her ultimate fear was that if my husband loses his memory, I lose my life. You are so consumed with trying to take care of the loved ones. It wasn't easy for my 97-year-old mother. And this is also a response to Dick, his earlier question about, how do you deal with the complexity of all of this that surrounds you? Part of it is doing what I'm doing here. David Brooks has this great book called The Second Mountain. The first mountain is your career, all taking care of kids, going through a divorce, all the stuff you have to do, getting fired and all this stuff. That's the first mountain. The second mountain is people who are in that aging stage like I am. What's your moral purpose? My moral purpose is doing stuff like this. Your moral purpose is doing what you're doing and trying to, through a navigation process, connect with other people who can work with you, loved ones, friends, the village of people. There's no quick answer. There's no quick solution to this. It's a human interaction, the human experience you're going through that's difficult. That's all I can tell you.
Also communication, and I think the risk you took in sharing your question directly is an important part of this. So I think there will be some follow-up conversation, and then thank you for your willingness to challenge this whole group.
Hi there. My name is Nancy Brennerman, and my husband is one of Rubin's oldest friends. So we're here to support Rubin tonight. But my question has to do with the fear of the unknown that people have when their family members have dementia. Am I going to get dementia? It was older people who may have had it, and what am I supposed to be looking for? What's the research sort of telling you about the passing on of dementia to family members?
That's a good question, and one I get a lot as well. So typically when we think about genetic causes of Alzheimer's disease, we think about the earlier onset varieties. So folks who are experiencing symptoms before the age of 65 tend to be at higher risk of that being something genetically predisposed. The older we get, the more common Alzheimer's becomes. And so it is not uncommon for families to have multiple members of the family who are older who have Alzheimer's disease, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a genetic cause. But there can be clusters of risk factors, some of them blood vessel related, some of them genetic in other ways or environmental that can cause there to be more than one case in a family. But typically what I tell families in terms of pure genetic risk, it's those earlier onset folks that we would potentially talk to about genetic testing if that was something that they wanted to pursue.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that, and we haven't talked about it yet, and that's hearing loss. There is some great new data, great in the sense that it's reliable, linking hearing loss to cognitive decline. Okay, so when I say cognitive decline, I mean the dementia term umbrella, not Alzheimer's, not mixed, not vascular, but all of them. So we have a weird thing in our culture. People don't like to say they have a hearing problem. And you talk about couples and having an intervention for couples, everybody's got what did he say? What did he say? Is it during the movies or whatever? Hush, hush, it just sort of happens at a certain age. But we have a hard time, it seems. Like I'm picking up my glasses because none of us seem to have trouble when we develop nearsightedness. We say, oh, I got to use my glasses to read. Okay, it's kind of common. But for some reason, people don't like to get their hearing checked. So I was just thinking what you were talking about in families. I don't know anything about hearing loss in families, but if it's one of the cluster risk factors, I know that sleep apnea could. So just as Dr. Blake said, it's not like this direct genetic contribution. It's not so much in your genes, but it's in a lot of different factors. And I'm really glad I remembered to mention hearing loss at the end, because it's my next campaign as part of our web to get people to get their hearing tested. Now, here's the thing, there are problems, okay? Medicare doesn't pay for hearing aids. But over the counters are coming. Hearing aids used to be lousy. Nobody wanted to wear them. Everybody lost them. I know the drill. Like I told you, I've been at this a really long time. But it's all getting better, the whole hearing thing. And now you can wear really prominent earbuds and people just think you're hip. Okay. So it's just sort of like hearing aid. No, that's my Apple AirPod, and it's just like, they can have a break. But seriously, check your hearing. Big risk factor, new data. Same way with sleep problems. Thanks.
And I'm going to just give you a second here. I want to add to the hearing issue because any sensory deficit is going to impact how the brain functions. If you never hear something well, will you remember it? No. And it's not because your memory center is failing, it's because the input side has a problem. So another intervention for quality of life and function in aging is making sure that you've got the current prescription for your glasses, is making sure that your ears are not so clogged with wax that you can't hear anything, or something more serious. So we have a question in the front.
Great, okay, it is on. Okay, hey, great. This is a great platform this evening to speak to Alzheimer's in general. My name is John Newby. I'm actually a physician as well, and I'm a proud member of the Maine Alzheimer's Association. So Drew and Amy, I'm very acquainted with, and it's great to be here tonight with so many folks. There are a number of thoughts and issues, concerns, and questions that have come to mind. I actually happen to be a caregiver myself. My wife and I have suffered, and I say that together because we've been together now for 34 years. In fact, our anniversary was just this Sunday. But my wife we suffer from Alzheimer's now for the last 6 years. And one of the questions that I had for the panel, because as a healthcare provider myself, I mean, obviously I'm not working as a healthcare provider now other than caring for my spouse. It's very difficult on a caregiver. I mean, so much to the point where the caregivers, I know even myself, I mean, I suffer now from depression, great depression, because I mean, you're literally watching the demise of your loved one right in front of you. And as a healthcare provider, you want to stop and slow down. And I know that there's all sorts of medications that are out on the market. So my question is geared more towards us as healthcare providers that turn caregivers. What resources directly, aside from the council that you mentioned, and by the way, I looked that up, is dementiaminds.org is the, no problem. But what do we do for that caregiver? Because we have to maintain, one of the things that bothers me on a daily basis is if something happens to me. I have no intention whatsoever in it over my dead body. Will my wife ever go in a nursing home type facility? But it is wearing on you. And then the other just follow-up question, because I do want to hear the answer to that, is Lyme disease. We didn't speak on that. And is there a propensity for cognitive impairments, MCI, Alzheimer's geographic nationwide, or is it just Western, or are we finding more of it in the Northeast? Have you noted this? So that's the other follow-up question there. So thanks.
May I answer a slightly different question? I'll answer your first question. Actually, I'm going to ask others. But I don't know anything about Lyme disease. That's why I'm going to pass it to Dr. Blake.
Yeah, no problem.
But what I wanted to answer instead was COVID and long COVID.
Mm.
I am super impressed with the amount of cognitive impairment from long COVID. And I went to a very interesting conference about this, and some of the interventions are a little counterintuitive. So my focus recently has been on post-COVID rehabilitation. And so I want to make sure that I not lose sight of that. We'll pass it around though for the Lyme question and the care partner question.
So I don't have the statistics on Lyme, but I would say that the common denominator between that and things like COVID is inflammation. And there's a lot of research going on in that area. It's really actually one of the bigger areas that is being looked at right now. So absolutely there can be cognitive change associated with Lyme disease, particularly if it penetrates into the central nervous system. I think the question, so many people in Maine have been exposed to Lyme. And so a lot of people are going to test positive, and how many of those people is it really a factor? And these are questions we don't have answers to necessarily. But I think there is a role for certainly looking at exposure and testing when appropriate. And Lyme does tend to come with a lot of other symptoms, so it's not something we typically see in isolation. But it is a complicated thing. I think Lyme is one of the more complicated diseases that we deal with in this region, for sure.
I think I've learned a lot today. I've learned a lot today, and I appreciate all the expertise both in the room and on the stage. I'm watching a dear friend of mine go through dementia, and her partner, and as all the ideas sound great as far as exercise and all the ways that they can and social connection, but what I'm actually seeing is that they're just getting more and more isolated. And that, and they don't, most of Maine is rural, it's getting harder, and I don't know what the answer to that is, because, a good example is, my friend who's going through dementia has always been an exerciser, but now she can't without help and instruction because of the problem solving and the spatial issues and the motor planning and all that. So she's tried a couple, they've tried some exercise classes, but she can't keep up. So where do those people who, as they get further into the process, continue with the things that they know they need to do to stay healthy, but I don't know where to send them. I don't know what to tell them.
I've lived this a lot, okay? I mean, it's been my good fortune to have an interest in this area, to have friends who live and thrive with dementia. And here's what we found worked. We haven't always got it right. My first experience with this, I did everything wrong. Okay. I had a very dear friend, young, early onset Alzheimer's disease, and a more rapid progression than one would like to see. Her partner was so uncomfortable with her partner's diagnosis, and they became increasingly isolated. I became a fearsome advocate for my friend Pam. Okay. She was a very social person. She loved going out. Her partner didn't want to go out. She was embarrassed. She had Alzheimer's. And I was obnoxious about advocating for Pam and completely overlooked Lynn's needs and how hard it was for her. So I learned a great deal about how to support both care partners and the person living with dementia by simply acknowledging they have needs and they have different needs. And then we, in my circle of friends, adopted those online circles of support kind of things that are real pop. Somebody mentioned cancer before. People with cancer diagnoses are really good at this, right? You get a cancer diagnosis, you get a whole team immediately that cares for you. And online, there's a way to sign up for your friends, right? So you have to get really practical right? Not just saying, let me know how I can help, but I'd love to go to lunch on Wednesday with Pam. Okay, is that a good time for you? Wednesday's not good. You know, it might be good for Rachel to come on Tuesday. I can't, but you work out a schedule that basically says to the care partner, you can have respite with us. Okay, let's all go out to lunch, but I'll be the one that's engaging with the person with dementia, if that works. Or you go do your own thing. I'm going out with Pam, you know, whatever it is. So schedule, bring every friend into, people want to be supportive. They don't know how, and they feel awkward about it. And so that's another thing back on our table that DAAnow.org has published this wonderful book called Pathways to Well-Being, Stories of Hope, Help, and Inspiration. It was written by and for people living with dementia, by and for care partners, and a sprinkling of dementia specialists thrown in for whatever reason. But they have such great practical tips. How to have holiday celebrations that don't overwhelm, so that people living with dementia and their care partners don't have to isolate. We also have a big campaign going on to create more dementia inclusive communities so that it's more comfortable for all. But I would say at a very practical level, rally the village, and everybody gets a night, you know, and we go do what that person used to like to do. And when it becomes uncomfortable, you don't call it a failure. You say, let's do something else. You know, if this is a person who loved to exercise but can't do what they used to do, everybody can do something. Okay, to move about, move their body, feel good in your body is really good for your brain. Not just the exercise thing, but this is true across the spectrum. When you feel a little more competent in your body, it's really good for your brain. You feel a little self-esteem. So you got an exercising friend, find the one she can do, not the one she can't.
Amazing.
Those are my
advice.
thoughts.
We have one question more that we're gonna and finish up. So right here, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. My question is about the diagnostic methods that you mentioned. I think it was PET scan, spinal tap, and then the new blood test. I was curious as to like what point those are recommended, and now that there is a blood test, which seems like the easiest, is that kind of something that's going to be done like first and foremost, and then possibly the others, or are the others needed? And
It's a great question, and I think an evolving answer. We're still learning how to kind of harness these new things. Before the newer generation of treatments were released, the other biomarker testing, the lumbar puncture and the PET scan, were not covered by insurance either. So even those are relatively new. Lumbar puncture was not, no. So these are all relatively new tools clinically. So we're still working out, you know, what order to do things. I will say for the newer generation agents, so I'm talking about lecanemab and donanemab, which are the IV medications that have come out. At this point in time, there's still a requirement that in order to initiate those medications, you have to have either a lumbar puncture or a PET scan. So the blood test is not yet enough, although I think that's actually going to be coming pretty soon. It needs to be validated a little bit further. The way I'm thinking about it now is a diagnostic tool for people considering those newer treatments, but also as a diagnostic tool for people who really want a higher degree of certainty. Because often very early in the disease process, there are a lot of possibilities, and historically we would watch people over time. And this gives people a way of finding out a little bit earlier what we're looking at. Not everybody takes me up on it. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations. And I've had some folks say, you know what, I'm not in a rush. So I think in terms of who gets it when is really a very personal decision. And not unlike genetic counseling, a little bit of discussion about what does a positive test mean to you and what does a negative test mean to you. And where do we go from there? How does that change what we're doing? So I think that will be an ongoing, evolving process, and it's really a personal one-on-one with your clinician.
So we're going to wrap this up. We're going to do something fun to finish. We're going to do a speed wisdom session. So you can say something that you want to impart to the group in 1 or 2 sentences, something wise, something humorous, something you just want them to walk out the room. And I'm going to let Ralph start us off.
My 2 sentences are to the caregivers like Sean and others who are frustrated with the complexity of that stage in life. Keep hope alive, because the infrastructure is going to come. It just began with the early stage people. We've got to address this issue. This Alzheimer movement is just at its beginnings. There's a way to go, and those changes are going to come because you're going to demand it.
All right, good job. Good modeling, Ralph. Drew, do you have a 1 or 2 sentence word of wisdom?
Sure, yeah, I just want to share that Amy mentioned I just went to the International Research Conference in Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, and there are 14,000 participants there, researchers from all over the world, including our friends here from the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine. They were making animal models that other scientists were using all around the world, and I saw many plenary sessions, but what was most inspiring was to see how many people are interested in this and approaching it from all angles, from, as Dr. Blake was saying, inflammation, tau, all the, and obviously the amyloid that we're actually making progress on. So anyway, it takes a village and everyone here has a part in this. So thank you.
All right, Dr. Blake, you're up.
I don't recall whose comment it was, but somebody had made a parallel to mental health. And so, I think about kind of my mom and my grandparents' generation who never really talked openly about things like depression. And now, this generation will tell other people about their therapist over breakfast. I'm hoping we can get to the same place with dementia. So I guess my words of wisdom would be, don't be afraid to talk about it.
Thanks for being here. Help us flip the script. No more gloom and doom. Hope is here. We can live with this, we can thrive with it, but only if we all work on it.
Excuse me, this may sound odd, but it's important to me. There are things that need to be remembered, and if you can still remember them, you're going to be in good shape. I happen to remember that Theodore Samuel Williams played left field for the Boston Red Sox. And he batted, I understand that he batted at 406, although somebody else said, no, it's been proven that he actually batted 403. That's okay. I mean, I've remembered that stuff for 50 years, 60 years. I don't know what it is. And then also you can always learn. What did I learn? Maybe this sounds odd, but I noted watching a Lou Gehrig program on TV, and I thought, gee, this guy was okay, and he was, as most of you probably know, that he had, sorry, what's the disease? Illness? Lou.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Lou Gehrig's disease.
And
ALS, thank you. And
Rubin, that fits perfectly with what Dr. Blake said. It's time we talk about it openly and honestly, much like Lou Gehrig did almost 100 years ago, believe it or not.
wow.
It's been a while. Now Amy is going to finish us out.
So today's my dad's birthday. He would have been 91. I was his caregiver for 6 years before he passed away, but he had Alzheimer's, well, he had mixed dementia, and he was passionate about learning everything he could about the disease. He wanted to find a cure, and he would read about it, he would try everything, he would talk to me about it. It's like, there has to be a pill I could take. And then he said one day to me, he was like, God, Amy, I hope that in your lifetime they find a cure. And so I think it's just very apropos that today we are all here talking about it and talking about how far we've come and that there is hope. So thank you all for being here.
And I'll take moderator's privilege and give my word of wisdom. My father, before his dementia, would say, I'm making memories. And my father was big. I don't know if any of you remember those Super 8 cameras with the big light bars before we had my father documented every family event, and he would always say, I'm making memories. And my advice is keep making memories. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to remind you all, if you'd like to take some food home with you, please help yourselves. We have plenty. And also, if you're interested in doing a program here at the JCA, either as a participant or as a volunteer, we have a sign-up sheet over here. Please add your name if you're interested. Thank you. Have a great night.